Fresh air.
Hello and welcome to Fresh Ears. This is the podcast where we explore the world of podcasting from the perspective of brands and businesses. I'm Michaela Hallam, Director of Content at Fresh Air.
And I'm Neil Cowling, the founder of Fresh Air, and we are the UK's leading podcast company for brands.
I'm going to stop you before you go any further. Actually, Lanique, our brilliant producer, I'm going to make a note here to say that I think I might need a buzzer for future episodes because I am going to be pressing the button when we want to explain things or when I want to call things out. You said that the UK's leading podcast company for brands. What data do we have to prove that?
Well, we're the best, and I don't think there's any discussion about that.
We have a badge. We're the best.
We are the most awarded podcast company in Europe.
Okay, that counts.
According to the Lovies. We have more expertise and more dedication towards making podcasts accessible for brands, helping them to understand it better than anybody else, the expertise we have in-house, etc. I don't need to sell it to you.
You don't need to sell it to me, but we care about what we do. We're passionate, and it's creative flair and commercial nous, no vanity projects.
Exactly that. Thank you. That's all on the website, I think.
Right, you can carry on now.
All right, so this is the first episode of the revamped Fresh Ears. Fresh Ears has been going for a long time, and we decided to give it a bit of a kick up the bum by Michaela and I sitting and talking every fortnight to somebody who we really think has something to add to the conversation about podcasts and brands. So this is the first.
So we can reassure you that it's not just going to be us two each week.
Oh
as
God,
well.
Nobody wants that.
Good.
Not even me. We're recording here in TYX Studios in King's Cross, and this is our home. This is where we have the office. It's where we come in to do our recordings and to socialise and occasionally drink wine and even more occasionally water the plants in the office. Today we're going to be talking to Zoe Bruton from voice assistant ad tech firm Say It Now, because we think they're really exciting. Plus, we're going to go through some regular talking points. We're going to understand what's going on in audio and brands and try and join the lines and hopefully bring some expertise and some insight to the table.
And the second thing that we'll be doing every week or every episode is bringing to life our podcast recommends. This is a regular feature in our newsletter. And it's basically our top pick of the podcasts, not just our own, I should make that very clear, podcasts globally that you should listen to and why. And we're going to get recommendations from colleagues and other industry professionals, friends of Fresh Air. It says here in our bullet points who we decide have good taste, but actually it might come down to whether or not you think that they have good taste based on what they pick. You were going to say something?
I was just going to say, I mean, if anyone listening wants to send us a recommendation, as long as they do have good taste, then they can send that in.
Again, to be decided. But before we get stuck into all of that, let's kick off with some fresh news. This is where we'll be talking about what we've been getting up to.
So our biggest podcast of the last couple of years in terms of what complexity apart from anything else, but also profile of guests, is Show on the Road from Auto Trader.
Love Show on the Road. Good taste. I have good taste.
You do.
The most recent episode of that has featured Ollie Murs. There'll be one out this week as well. But I think the really interesting thing about the creative concept for this is the production might be massively complicated, but the concept is really straightforward in that we put a celebrity in a car and take them on a road trip down literal memory lane, and so we get the stories that we wouldn't hear otherwise, and we get reactions. That's what I like about it. It's emotional reactions to things that we wouldn't hear about otherwise, and also surprising stories from sliding doors careers moments to actual aliens.
Yeah, that was Rowan Kemp who literally said, oh, over here is the first place I saw an alien, and suddenly that episode shifted.
It did. It moved on in unexpected ways.
Another of our podcasts that's back after a summer break is Media Confidential, and that is from Prospect Magazine.
Quite a contrast to Ollie Murs.
Yeah, I don't think Ollie Murs has ever featured in Prospect Magazine. I mean, I might be wrong. I might be doing a massive disservice. But Prospect is a very intellectual current affairs magazine, comes out once a month and is edited by Alan Rusbridger, the former Pulitzer Prize-winning editor of The Guardian, in conversation with Lionel Barber, former editor of the FT.
You could also actually ask such prestigious people questions that you might have about the media landscape, because they do a weekly Q&A episode too.
They do. It's all about what's going on in the media, who owns what. Would think often stories that you might think are a bit niche, but actually have much wider ramifications. Things like what's going on at the Jewish Chronicle, what is happening in local news media, how is the media landscape evolving over time that affects us all, and of course, what is Elon Musk doing that's going to ruin everything in the future. So there's all sorts of insights there.
That's Neil Cowling's opinion and not that of fresh air. Let's move on from what we're doing. What's happening elsewhere?
So you've got AirPods Pro 2, which I have mixed feelings about. So the idea with the AirPods, which are great, I mean, they are the best in-ear headphones on the market, but they can now test your hearing and act as a hearing aid. And I sort of love it and I sort of hate it.
How do they do that?
So you can have an app and do the hearing test on the app. So it tests your response to different frequencies of sound, and that then tailors the AirPods to amplify the frequencies of sound that you don't hear as well.
So it's not just how you hear your favourite podcasts, but it's actually how you experience the world at large around you as well.
Yes, so even if you're not listening to anything at all, you can still keep them in and they will act as hearing aids for the wider world.
What's not to like?
I'll tell you what's not to like.
I knew you were going to tell me.
Wandering around with AirPods in is something that your kids do to really wind you up.
Yeah, okay. Point well made.
I remember talking to a recruiter, someone from a recruitment company, who was talking about some Gen Zers turning up to a job interview with their AirPods in, which is insanity.
Yeah, my daughter tries to hide it by having just like one piece of hair strategically placed over the side of her face that she just has one headphone in so that she can pretend that she's listening to me.
Yeah, she's clever.
Well, she is quite clever, but that's not gone unnoticed.
But I mean, this is the difficulty, isn't it? That you really want a hearing aid to be unnoticed, whereas having AirPods in immediately assumes that someone is, frankly, not listening to you.
Well, maybe we just have to get used to it, because I think actually the concept of that is brilliant. Or maybe people just have to start wearing badges. Say, I'm listening to you. I'm listening to you even better than I was before, actually.
Yeah, ignore my AirPods. They're acting as a hearing aid.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that. And the other thing that caught our eye in the last couple of weeks is the IPA's report, the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, their latest report called Making Sense, the Commercial Media Landscape.
That's quite a lot of words.
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
Well, it's talking about how different types of media take up different shares of the general media that we consume.
Okay.
And
what does it tell us?
Interesting. Thank you so much for queuing me up. Interesting what it says about audio specifically is that live radio has decreased in the share of the media that we consume. Commercial live radio. So fewer people are just turning their car radio on and hearing whatever comes out of it.
Yeah.
More people, understandably, are choosing what they want to listen to. So that might be radio on demand. I don't want to listen to what's on the radio right now. I want to listen to last night's specialist music show.
Okay.
Or they're listening to podcasts. And obviously, we love podcasts. So that's a good thing.
We don't have to whisper that. I think we can be proud about that.
We love podcasts, guys. That's why we're here.
But how does it help the people who we work with? What does that tell us?
Well, what it tells us is that actually audio generally has grown. So live radio has gone down from 12% to 9% since 2015, but audio as a share of people's commercial media has actually grown from 12% to 13%. So if you were traditionally advertising purely on live radio, then you probably want to shift across and understand how you can exist in the on-demand audio world. I mean, we're going to hear from Zoe in a minute from Say It Now, who gives other reasons why on-demand audio offers you things that live broadcast have never been able to do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that conversation. The other stat that I really like from this report is about one of the most notoriously hard to reach audiences, which is the 16 to 34 5-year-old audience. And I love the fact that podcasting sits within the top 5 reaching media properties for that age bracket. And it backs up some of the other research that we had last year. I think it was from Spotify.
Yeah, they were talking about how young people consume podcasts in a way that old farts like you and me used to go and get.
Speak for yourself. You keep doing this.
Old farts used to buy self-help books or go to a library. Remember those? And take out a book. Whereas now, rather than, again, listening to whatever you're given, people seek out, if they have a problem, if they want to learn something, they want to be entertained in a particular way, they go and seek out audio because of all the in-depth, nuanced detail that it gives you, as opposed to reading it in an old-fashioned book.
I still like a book.
Yeah.
Okay, as we referenced earlier, we are joined by a very special guest in the studio today. Zoe Bruton is Commercial Director for Say It Now, which is a voice assistant ad tech firm. Now, I did say to Zoe at the start of this, welcome, Zoe.
Thank you.
I am going to ask you some probably quite naive questions. I want to really understand what Say It Now is, how it works, what it does, and particularly how we can make it work and make it work in the audio space really hard for our clients and potential clients. So, first of all, we've said that you're Commercial Director for Say It Now. What does that actually mean? What do you do?
Well, thanks for the intro. You did a great job at explaining Say It Now. So my role at Say It Now is to think about all things monetization, think about how we can really get some new brands into the voice space. So Say It Now is a voice ad tech business, like you mentioned. And what we do is we enable consumers to be able to engage with any advertising or marketing messages using just their voice. You know, conversation is the way that we've evolved and chosen to communicate as humans, and we really think there's an opportunity for brands to use voice in their marketing strategies to enable some really actionable, measurable insights. And when we're thinking about audio in particular, you know, audio is really hard to measure as a channel, and pushing someone to that voice space gives us loads of opportunity to really think about how we can measure that performance, really.
Well, I said I'd do this, but a really kind of naive question. When you say voice,
yeah,
what exactly do you mean by that even?
Really good question. So what I mean by that is literally having a conversation. So I think you've got an ad spot, maybe a 20-second or 30-second ad spot within your podcast, or maybe you've got a podcast host reading your host read. We give them a call to action that says something along the lines of, to find out more information about your brand, just say, Alexa, open brand name, let's say Lloyds Banking, for instance, and the consumer can literally talk back to that ad to really think about how they can not only engage with that brand, but they might want to buy a product, they may want to access some more content. So it's literally having that one-to-one conversation with your audience.
So do you have to be listening on an Alexa?
No, absolutely not. And I think this is a really interesting space about podcasting specifically. So back in 2019, when Say It Now came to market, we were specifically in the audio space. And the reason being, you know, smart speaker landscape is absolutely booming. We know it's really democratizing the way that people are accessing the internet. You've had mobile and you've had desktop access, and now you have voice. You have that little smart speaker at home which you can talk to. And what we realized was that brands weren't necessarily using this to their ability, which they could do so. It was new, right? And we came along and thought, actually, let's start in the audio space, because if someone's listening on their smart speaker, it's a really great way to be able to engage with an audience. But what we soon realised is that when someone is talking to their smart speaker, it's a really engaged, active listening environment. And if you think about podcasting, if you're listening on your mobile, right? You're having to listen, you're not just hearing. I always talk about audio in two different ways. You're either, you know, hearing what's going on in the background, or you're actively listening. And I think a podcasting environment is an active listening environment. If you give someone the opportunity to use their voice, it's a really active and really definite way of, you know, engaging with that brand. So actually it speaks to a different part of our brain. So you can actually think, you know, you're listening to your podcast, and then you can speak to your smart speaker or speak to your, whether your smart speaker device.
So you can be listening on headphones,
yep,
but then speak to your smart speaker
absolutely
as a separate thing, because the specific set of words that we put in that call to action will activate that smart speaker to initiate something.
Absolutely, bang on. So it's a really universal way of using voice. And I think that's one of the myths when we came to market. People thought you have to be listening on your smart speaker. And what we really see in the podcasting space is no, you don't actually have to be. And we see really, really strong engagement in podcasting because we have so many active listeners. And then having that active, conversation is a really nice extension to that space.
I think one of the really nice things this solves is something we've always struggled with podcasting, is that you're not in front of a screen. You're not necessarily looking at your phone. You're not scrolling as you're listening. So that's always been an issue with the call to action, hasn't it? It was all going back to radio ads.
Yeah.
Say a phone number. If you're listening in the car to a radio ad, you're not going to remember the phone number by the time you're ready to do anything about it. Or even if you say a URL, people aren't going to store that in their head and then come back to it later. Whereas if you can just say something that then maybe opens the browser next time you're there. So is that part of the issue that you're trying to solve?
Absolutely. Part of the issue is really decreasing that cognitive load for the consumer, allowing for that instant engagement with a brand. There are so many, advertising messages we hear as consumers within the day. How do you filter out through all of that noise? And how you filter out is by offering someone something different. And when you have that voice call to action, it speaks to a different part of your brain. So we've done a lot of neuro insight research into, what voice does, and actually it evokes so much human emotion that actually the memory encoding when you have a voice call to action is way higher, and you get better brand awareness, increases in consideration and purchase intent when using that voice.
Give us an example then. Give us a case study. How does it work? How do people respond to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've just worked with American Express actually across podcasting, and they did a 20-second ad spot, and they were just promoting their gold card. And what they did is they had their 30-second ad, and at the end of that ad there was, to find out more information about Amex Gold Card, just say, Alexa, open Amex Gold. Consumer says, Alexa, open Amex Gold. Hello and welcome to the Amex Gold skill. Would you like to find out more information and be sent a link to phone? Consumer says yes. And then you're able to have that link to phone sent straight to your mobile phone in your pocket. So there's the opportunity to either engage with the brand now or later. And I think that's really important when we're giving consumers agency over that ad experience, especially when we're thinking about podcasting. If you're in your favourite podcast and you don't want to engage with your phone right then and there because you're actively listening, giving that opportunity to be able to think about, okay, I'll save that for later and then engage with the brand, really works in tenfold.
And back to that point about the cognitive load, it's much easier to remember something to say to Alexa than to remember a multiple digit phone number, which I can't even write down in the right order if I have writing it down when someone's saying it.
Oh, totally. It's like you have that mental rehearsal of saying that brand name out loud. So even if you aren't, engaging with Amex right then and there, you've got a mental rehearsal. So you're going to remember it more, That's the way our brains work from a very kind of basic neuro level. So being able to transcend that into advertising, I think is gold. But maybe I'm slightly biased on that.
You probably are.
Yeah.
Richard, our director of marketing, would not forgive me if I didn't ask the question. I don't know how much you can share, but what are the data-led results? You said that Amex is a client. How much can you share about actually what that did for them as a client?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can speak a bit more generally around, what that data looks like. So when we have a brand that's using a voice call to action, whether it be in a host read or whether it be in an ad spot, we get to really understand how many people are coming from ad spot through to the smart speaker skill. Why is that important? It's important because we need to know the engagement rate, which we call a voice through rate. So it's the equivalent to a click-through rate if we're thinking display or we're thinking banner ads. And then once we understand how many people are coming through to the ad spot, we can then start to really think about how they're engaging with their skill or with the brand. So when we're thinking about when people are engaging, what times of day of week, and how they're engaging. So with what marketing messages. So for instance, again, referring back to Amex, there may have been a link to sign up, but there may also have been a link to find out more information about the other products that they have in their portfolio. If everybody's going crazy for all of the browse more info on a Monday, we can really start to think how we can optimize that performance. And again, in audio, specifically podcasting, so a lot of podcasting sits behind a walled garden, pushing them to that measurable space gives us loads of insight we can iterate off of.
That's the data side of it. My role is about kind of the creative wrapping of and the storytelling side of it. So how playful can you get with the design of the skill that is the response to that voice-activated call to action? Because I'm imagining a space where you're actually having an audio extension of your brand through that skill. So are there set parameters, or can we be really playful with what happens next once you've asked the question?
We can be really, really playful. We have 4 main products, one being our voice commerce, so offering an instant purchase in skill. We have a send to phone functionality where you can send any digital URL to phone, whether it be a link to download an app, a link to listen to more content, to browse. We also have a reminder functionality where you can remind someone to speak to their smart speaker skill every single week to really think about returning custom. And the last one is we have a more overarching sponsorship-led product whereby you can put the call to action in the hands of talent. But what we do creatively in that space is really up to you. We can be as playful as we want. So we can ask questions. Really, whatever you can do in a conversation between you and I, we can really put in that brand space, and we're urging more clients to get more creative.
Including the language that you use and the voice that you use to deliver all of that.
And, when I'm thinking about cars and automotive, should I say, you can configure a car using just your voice. If you go on a lot of automotive websites, there's always a car configurator. What would be your dream car? And you click through and it's a dynamic decision tree, and actually you can speak to the brand and you can do that. The brand can ask you, are you interested in hybrid, or are you interested in petrol? Are you interested in hatchback or SUV? And as consumers are becoming more au fait with using their voice, because there are so many different touch points at home, you have smart fridges now you can speak to, you have your smart speaker, you have your phone, you have your TV. The conversations are going to become more and more varied. Therefore, you can have as much creative fun as you want to.
I can think of so many places where our clients can use this in the automotive space, Auto Trader in particular, kind of choosing your next car through them as that kind of
absolutely
decision-making tree is to kind of get them to funnel what's offered to them as a result of that.
But you can have so much fun in that space. It's a real extension.
So an experiential space.
Yeah, you can be super experiential. Okay. We've done quizzes in the past for On the Beach, whereby they've had like an 8-question travel quiz. And it's a new way to have fun with your consumers. As I mentioned earlier, consumer time is so precious. How do we as brands really respect that time, but also get the engagement that we want as marketers?
Brands and marketers will always have the same question at this point, which is, does it make it more difficult? Does it make it much more expensive? Is it a complicated thing to add to a campaign?
Absolutely not. When I'm really thinking about the creative life cycle of creating any audio content, the main thing that we have to switch out, instead of having the search URL or a find out more call to action, we just need a smart speaker call to action. So from a creative timeline standpoint, we're not adding anything on per se. Once we've done that, whether it be in your podcast within a host feed or actually within the podcast content or dynamic ad insertion, we then need to create a smart speaker skill, and how we do that is via either text to speech using Alexa voice or AI voice, or we can use a brand voice or a podcast voice as well. So we create a script per se, and we get that signed off, and we can create that and go live within 10 days. So it's a really simple process. And when, I've worked in innovation in the audio space for a long time now, and when we're thinking about bringing new innovation to market, I think 10 days is, it's a pretty speedy timeline. So
that's not bad, 10 days.
Yeah. I'm glad you say that. I'm glad you agree.
Is it best practice? Is it campaign led, or is it an always on approach? Have you had kind of data back from that yet?
Yeah, so always on approaches work really well. What we tend to see is once a brand comes into the space, because of the amount of data that they get, they tend to want to stay on in the voice space because there is so much that they can learn. Again, if I go back to podcasting and audio as a medium in general, it's really hard to get that measurement and data. So to have that constant 360 feedback loop is a really nice way for us as brands to understand what our consumers want, and it shapes that future narrative of that brand strategy. So a lot of our brands have been working with us for 6 months plus, which is a really nice place to be, especially when you're a relatively new business to market.
And what's the future look like? What's the next step of Say It Now?
Big question. To really think about how we can take conversation to the next level. When we first came to market, it was very much, educating people on what voice is and why smart speakers, are so important. Now, it is very much common knowledge that smart speakers is the now. It's not the next big thing. It's what people are doing at home to turn their lights on. My little boy, he's 2.5, and he's always saying, "Alexa, play Elton John," because that's his favourite thing at the moment.
My kids are always stealing the Alexa to play their music. Yes,
my kids just make it play a fart noise. Is that normal?
See, my little boy's not old enough for that yet, but I'm sure
That's
I've got that coming.
Yeah. Alexa, make a wet fart noise.
Let's not go there, thanks.
But 60% of UK households now have a smart speaker. There's 149 million listening hours across smart speaker devices. So it's less about what a smart speaker is and more about, how do we use that going forward? And we've had the, really product-led campaigns that we've run with. We've got a Q&A. But now we really want to take it to that next level. How do we have more nuanced conversations? How do we create some large language models and small language models off the back of website content? So maybe we could ask, a consumer can ask Alexa, tell me about X policy if we're talking about insurance, which is already based on that website. So instead of having to go through all the different tabs, you can actually just have that conversation in a really brand safe manner within your smart speaker. So it's all about extending that conversation and having, a lot more fun with it as well. And I think podcasting is a huge growth area for voice. It's relatively untapped. And if we look at podcasting to its, core form, which you guys know better than anybody, is so intimate, and it's about having that conversation, and so is voice as a measurable call to action. So how do we marry the two, and how do we create some really stellar, podcasting strategies using voice?
There are so many parallels, it feels, between the technology that you're developing and podcasting, from the bonus of being always on to not actually having to explain what a podcast is anymore. When we started out, again, that's what we're having to do. So I look very much forward to the first campaign that we might work on together.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you very much. That was Zoe Bruton, Commercial Director for Say It Now.
So now it's time for one of our actual podcast recommendations. This week it comes from Martin Points Roberts, one of our senior producers here, who has done science podcasts, journalism podcasts, taken on Vladimir Putin in the form of The Big Steal, and he loves a podcast. So here's the one that he is recommending this week.
Hi, it's Martin. I'm a senior producer at Fresh Air. The podcast recommend I have is called Transmissions, and it's the definitive story of Joy Division and New Order. This is now series 2. The first series, which was narrated by Maxine Peake, followed how Joy Division got together and led us all the way up to the eve of their tour of America when Ian Curtis famously committed suicide. This series picks up, and it's narrated by Elizabeth Olker this time, and it follows how New Order become the band that they became, moving from guitar indie rock to electronica and onwards. It's great. It's got exclusive interviews with all the band members. It's got all the music, all the stories, all the myths, all the legends that surrounded the band, the excesses, the disasters. And so, I just love it. It takes me back to much more carefree days of my youth, which I would love to go back to. And it's just a joy to listen to. So I would recommend this podcast if you love the music of Joy Division and New Order. And if you don't, well, you really should.
Thanks again to NPR for that podcast recommend. If you're listening on Spotify, you could tell us what your podcast recommend would be as a comment right there in the app. And I think that just about rounds it up for this episode.
I think that was all right, as a first go.
As a first go.
And it'll get better, won't it?
You'll notice how we said, tell us what your podcast recommends on Spotify, not what you thought of this podcast.
Yeah, oh God, don't do that.
That was deliberate.
No, don't do that. Give this 3 or 4 episodes, I'd say, until you
we'll settle into it. What we are very good at doing, however, is creating powerful podcasts for brands or businesses. And if you want to do just that, you can find us at freshairproduction.co.uk.
And if you'd like to sign up for officially the world's best newsletter that discusses podcasts and brands and things, then you can do so on our LinkedIn page. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening.
Fresh air.